Hello everyone, and welcome to this session of the Leuven seminar in classical German philosophy. Today we have a special session. It will be a book launch of a volume published in 2023 titled Fichte in the Americas and edited by Maria Jimena Solé and Elisabeth Millán Brusselin. We will circulate the flyer of the book in the chat and also the website where you can buy the book. So before introducing the speakers of today's session, I would like to kindly ask participants to switch on their cameras when it's possible. Of course, it's not obligatory, but it would be nice so that we can see each other. I also would like to mention that after the official session, we will keep the Zoom meeting open for more informal conversations. So you're all very welcome to stay. And as for the structure of today's session, it goes as follows. So after a 15 minutes introduction by the editors of the book, four speakers who all contributed to the volume will touch upon some ideas related to the chapter they wrote. After that, we will have plenty of time for questions and discussion. So let me now introduce to you the speakers. I will start by introducing the editors. So it is my pleasure to introduce Maria Jimena Solé, who is currently a researcher at the Argentinian National Scientific and Technical Research Council and professor of History of Modern Philosophy in the Philosophy faculty of the University of Buenos Aires. She works mainly on the history of philosophy and modern political philosophy, with a focus on Spinoza and Spinozism, the debates of the Enlightenment and the emergence of German idealism. She has written and edited numerous articles and books, including Spinoza en Alemania, Historia de la Santificación de un Filósofo Maldito, published in 2011, El Caso de la Ilustración, La Polémica del Spinozismo, published in 2013, and ¿Qué es Ilustración? El debate en Alemania a finales del siglo XVIII, published in 2018. Next, we have Elisabeth Millán Brusselin, who is a professor of philosophy at DePaul University. She works on aesthetics, German idealism and romanticism, and Latin American philosophy. She is the author of Friedrich Schlegel and the Emergence of Romantic Philosophy, published in 2007, editor of the Palgrave Handbook of German Romantic Philosophy, published in 2020, and co-editor of the Brill Companion to German Romantic Philosophy, published in 2018. She has also published extensively on Humboldt's view on nature and is currently completing a book titled Alexander von Humboldt, Romantic Critic of Nature. Next on the list is Christian Klotz, who is currently an associate professor at the Federal University of Goiás. His research focuses on the following authors and themes: Kant, Fichte, Hegel, Transcendental Philosophy and Theory of Subjectivity. Published books include Selbstbewusstsein und praktische Identität, eine Untersuchung über Fichtes Wissenschaftslehre Nova Methodo, published in 2002, and Kants Widerlegung des problematischen Idealismus, published in 1993. Then we have Maria Paz Lamas, who is currently finishing her graduate work in the Department of Philosophy and Letters at the University of Buenos Aires. She's active with the German Idealism Research Group there. Her current research focuses upon the underexplored connections between Fichte's work and the work of key figures from the Latin American philosophical tradition. And then we have Marco Rampazzo Bazzan, who is currently an adjunct professor of history of modern philosophy at the Federal University of Espírito Santo. His main areas of research include the birth of modern political concepts, the reception of the French Revolution in the German context, contractualism and its legacy, and the crisis of Marxism. He is president of the Groupe de Recherche Matérialiste in Paris and member of the Fichte Gesellschaft. He recently co-edited a volume titled Transizione in Questione, Dialettica, Struttura, Differenza, which came out, if I'm not wrong, in 2024. Another recent publication of his is Les témoignages du compagnero presidente, Une parole action crédible et révolutionnaire, published in 2022. So last but not least, we have Manuel Tangorra, who will be replacing Francisco Gaspar. So I can say a few words on Manuel Tangorra, who is a postdoc here at KU Leuven. So beyond Hegelian thought, his academic interests cover the wider idealistic tradition, especially the work of Kant and Fichte, as well as the contemporary debates concerning decolonial thought, Eurocentrism, and anthropological perspectivism. In addition to articles that have appeared in specialized international reviews, he is the author of a monograph on Kant's philosophy titled Sistema y Libertad en la filosofía crítica de Kant, published in 2018. So without further ado, I will now hand things over to the editors for their introduction and to the other speakers for their comments. Please, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Pier Paolo, for this presentation. And thank you, Professor Karin de Boer and Luis Felipe Garcia for organizing this launch of our book that has appeared last year, but is still really new. So we are excited to share some thoughts on it with you all today. So really, we are very, very grateful for this opportunity. So this volume is, as you know, a collection. I will show the book. It's here. It exists in real paper, real material, as well as a digital book. So the book is a collection of writings. It's a collection of different texts produced by different people who are working in different parts of the world. So it's a really interesting collection of different viewpoints on Fichte and how Fichte's thought is received and appropriated and used in different debates in American soil. So the main theme of the collection is this connection between Fichte's philosophy and America, in particular Latin America. So to us, this book represents both a point of arrival and kind of a new beginning. It's a point of arrival because it condenses the results of long series of efforts that Latin American scholars have been carrying out for many years. But it also represents, as I said, a new beginning because it addresses a subject that until now has remained unexplored and unrecognized as an interesting or fruitful research area. So the origin, I will say something really briefly about the origin of the book and then say something, I will then say something about what the proposal of the book is, what this new beginning or this invitation that I think the book makes. So the origin of this project was the realization that Fichte's studies have experienced kind of a significant growth in American soil. So in the Americas, the flow of publications, of translations, the conferences, seminars, workshops that are being organized are growing, are increasing in number, and it has already been noted that students are attracted to Fichte's thought, and scholars from all over the world are participating in the events that we are organizing in our universities. So this area of Fichte studies in Latin America in particular has gained increasing relevance also in the international arena. The idea that Fichte's ideas that are becoming more and more attractive to us, to scholars and to students in this part of the world, has made us create in Latin America many years ago our Latin America Association for Fichte Studies. This is, in Spanish, is called the Sociedad Latinoamericana de Estudios sobre Fichte, so ALEF. And we have organized since then many events that have, as I said, attracted a lot of interest in the international arena. So the realization that Fichte studies are growing and are becoming more and more powerful in America drag us to the question, why is this happening? Why is Fichte a significant dialogue partner to us? Why are they reading, translating, teaching, and thinking with Fichte? Why do we develop his thought in Latin America, although Fichte was a German thinker who wrote and lived more than 200 years ago? So this question has been in our minds for quite a long time, and with our research group, our group in Buenos Aires, which we informally call the Fichte group, we decided to try and find some answers. So why do we Latin American thinkers study, read, translate, and teach on Fichte? So we proposed this topic, Fichte in the Americas, as the topic for our 6th international conference organized by our Latin American Association for Fichte Studies. And we took the occasion of this meeting to invite our colleagues to reflect on this link between Fichte's philosophy and our Latin American cultural traditions, our American ideas, and also our daily practices and our current debates. So it was also this international conference that was held in 2021. We also took it as an opportunity to strengthen the bond between the Latin American Fichte Studies Association and the North American Fichte Society, represented by Elizabeth here, because, well, we thought about this project as something spread through the Americas and not only, we were not only interested in Latin America in particular. So the invitation was to think and to research and to find out what happened with Fichte's ideas in America, why we are studying Fichte, and why these developments are still interesting to us, and why we find Fichte's ideas so current. So we didn't really know what to expect, if people would have something to say about these subjects, or even if we would find some interesting story about how Fichte's ideas were recepted and read and interpreted in America. But to our surprise and to our joy, the initiative was very well received, and the meeting that was held online in April 2021 was attended by many scholars from all over the Americas and Europe. So the conference had more than 30 presentations. We spent 3 days discussing this reconstruction of Fichte's thought reception in Latin American tradition, discovering affinities, discovering fruitful connections between Fichte's ideas and those ideas of American thinkers, discussing also the prevailing lines of research in our own research, the original interpretations that were produced in our universities, the way in which these local developments are linked to those developments of research generated in Europe or in other universities, other places considered central in the production of philosophical knowledge. So something that struck me personally as a surprise was that many of the participants were grateful for the opportunity to follow some ideas or some intuitions they had had for many years or for a long time, and they hadn't really found until that moment a forum or a space to pursue them or to put them in common discussion. So this was, as I said, really taken with a lot of enthusiasm. And the significance of the developments shared in this original meeting were, to us, so exciting and so innovative and so original that we decided to publish a volume in Spanish and Portuguese. And it's this one. And this volume so appeared soon after the meeting. Its appearance drew the attention of Mateo D'Alfonso, who was then the president of the International Fichte Society, and he suggested that we could make a proposal to Brill and publish the volume as a Fichte Studia and Supplementa volume in English and German. So it was the original and the innovative character of the contributions discussed during the original meeting, then published in our languages, in our mother tongues, that were thought to be valuable also for the international community of the Fichte studies. So we prepared this English language version, and I invited Elizabeth Millán Bruslan to join me for the selection and editing of the text. The support for this idea, for the idea of that Fichte in the Americas is an interesting line of research, suggests, in my opinion, a progressive move in the development of Fichte scholarship. With this collection, we present, I believe, a new horizon for thinking about Fichte's impact, research for new dimensions of Fichte's thought, and Fichte himself is revealed by these reflections as kind of a new figure with a new face. Just to say something really quickly about the volume, the papers gathered in this volume are presented in 3 sections. There are sections that deal with current subjects and current problems that are discussed in our local areas and in our local research areas, like gender studies or decolonial thought or social and cultural studies. But also, and maybe this is to me the most surprising part of the book, is that this collection of texts attempt to systematically rebuild the story of Fichte's reception in America. So this story that we thought was inexistent, that no one, we had this idea that Fichte was unknown or remained not studied, not read, or not pursued in American cultural and intellectual circles, was completely refuted by our own research. So we found that the story of Fichte's reception in America began during the first half of the 19th century and was led by really key figures of our cultural history, names that everyone knows, that we have, that we can identify as the big names of our cultural history, and they all have some reception and some comment on Fichte that allows us to, as I said, reconstruct the story of the reception as a really new phase of our research. So the as I was saying at the beginning, this is why I believe the book is a point of arrival. It condenses a lot of effort that we have been developing in the last years in the Latin America Association for Fichte Studies, but it also is a new beginning in the sense that it opens new perspectives and new lines of research that we hope to be able to continue. In a few weeks, we will have another conference of our Aleph in Brazil, and the proposal here is also to continue thinking about displacements of Fichte and how Fichte is read, translated, and interpreted in new contexts and in horizons of new problematics and new readings. So I think that's all I had thought about sharing. Maybe then we can pick up some of the ideas, but I leave you, Elizabeth, now the floor.
Thank you, Jimena, and thank you very much, Paulo, Karen, and Luis for organizing this. And thank you, Jimena, for inviting me after that wonderful Zoom conference. And I think COVID was good in this way, that it got us using Zoom because we can bring people together. That's been a problem in bridging, I think, the distance between some of the countries in Latin America and even in the US and then in Europe. So Zoom conferences help kind of put us all in contact with each other in a much easier way than it is to travel sometimes those very long distances, even from the US to Argentina, which I've been meaning to get to, and I hope I will. That will be more fun than doing it via Zoom. And Belgium too. I hope one day I'll get there so I can eat some chocolate. But anyway, it's not about chocolate, but about Fichte. And I have been working on Latin American philosophy for so long, and it's hard enough to convince people in the US of the importance of Latin American philosophy. And so to be involved in a project which is bringing Fichte and Fichte's reception in various countries in the Americas is very important, I think, because not only does the lens that this collection now gives to Fichte's work and reveals new aspects of his work, is that very important for Fichte, although even though compared to Kant and some of the other figures, maybe Fichte could be considered on the margins a bit compared to a lot of the thinkers in Latin American philosophy. Nobody doubts that Fichte is a philosopher, whereas we have that problem at times with the Latin American philosophy tradition because there's a kind of prejudice operating. So I think this kind of a volume which puts them on equal grounds, because it was never our intention, as Jimena was saying, to sort of say, this is the way to bring any credibility to Latin American philosophy. It's an equal kind of dialogue that we're trying to create here. It's a new lens to view Fichte, It's also introducing, though, Fichte readers. I think this is very important to some of these voices from Latin American philosophy that they would not have listened to normally. So this, I think, is part of creating a new kind of philosophical international dialogue, which doesn't replicate the traditional kind of boundaries of nation states and starts from, the empires and goes out. We really want a kind of collaboration on equal footing. And I think the essays of the three sections that Jimena already sketched, Fichte and Current Debates in the Americas, which helps us to see with more clarity also how Fichte can have something to say about gender, for example, and also issues of slavery and colonization, and freedom in the Latin American realm. And as one of our contributors who will speak later, I had talked about modernity and its peripheries, Fichte on native existence and decolonization of thought. So these are themes, I think, in Fichte that people who are working maybe from Europe are not used to thinking of. So that just gives more credence to the idea that we, the field itself, philosophy, will benefit if we keep opening up the dialogues and including more voices from different historical circumstances. To speak with Spanish philosopher Jose Ortega Gasset, that we have to take historical circumstances very seriously, and we can't do that if we're always looking and treating even German figures in the same way without branching out. And then in the second section, I think both Jimena and I wrote essays for this section, Fichte's Spirit at the Foundation of the American Independent Nations. So we have interesting essays in that section on the role that aspects of Fichte's thought played in some of the themes that were operative during the independence movements in Latin America. So Jimena wrote a really interesting essay on philosophy and emancipation, Fichte's Spirit, in Alberti's letter. So talking, again, it's never about sort of reducing any Latin American thinker to themes from Fichte, but again, creating a dialogue, which is harder to do than at first glance it seems. But I think the contributors did it really beautifully. Oh, and I also, before I forget, did want to thank, we thanked Mateo already because he actually introduced me and Jimena. So without that introduction at the Fichte meeting, I don't think we would have come together to do this work. And we also have another volume planned on Latin American, a handbook to Latin American philosophy, which will bring together thinkers from Latin America and the US and Europe. But also, of course, Marco Ibaldo, who was very supportive throughout. And he kept telling me, wir müssen Politik machen for this book. He wanted to really make sure people knew about the book, and he was very supportive. And two really great readers of the manuscript. We all know how important that is if you've ever, and I've had that experience with my Humboldt work, if you get the wrong reader, your book's not going anywhere. So we were very lucky to get two really strong reports, people who understood what we were trying to do and appreciated it. And they were both working in, one was working in Austria, another one in Germany. So they were working from there, but very appreciative of what this would bring to the discussion. And without their very good reports, the book would not have been published. So we're very grateful to them as well. But I think, yes, going back to the three sections, the first section, the second section on independence, and then the third section on Fichte's reception, influence, and appropriation by American thinkers. And Christian today and Maria Paz will talk about their essays from that section. And I think that nicely highlights also, again, this idea that we're not ever reducing the thinkers of Latin America to themes related to Fichte, but trying to show that there is an opening on both sides when we have this dialogue take place, which requires a kind of dexterity and openness that is often not there. And I think this book opens a new landscape. And as we end the forward to the collection by saying, after quoting something, of course, well, as I say, of course, that's from my end of the romantics, have to have the romantics in mind. And Novalis has a really interesting fragment where he talks about hypotheses being nets, only he who casts will catch. Now, interestingly enough, again, this is a sign of a debate going on. Karl Popper uses that fragment from Novalis at the beginning of his book on the logic of scientific discovery, which one might not expect at first glance that Novalis would be used by Karl Popper, but he saw in Novalis's work the kind of scientific promise of it, something a lot of too few thinkers see, I would argue. But he only quotes from a small part of the fragment. Novalis goes on in that fragment to say, wasn't America itself found through a hypothesis? High and above all else lives the hypothesis, only it remains eternally new whenever it also merely defeats itself. So Novalis was well aware of the progressive role of the hypothesis. The embrace of the hypothesis lent to romantic thought a level of humility that made the search for truth more important than the goal to capture truth. I think this humility was important in all of the work we did as well. There's never an arrogance that Fichte knows everything and the Latin American thinkers are just trying to get to his truth, but a new truth emerges when we bring the two into dialogue with each other. In the progressive spirit of the power of a good hypothesis and the value of searches for new truths, Jimena and I encourage the contributors to embrace a hypothesis about Fichte's thought and its connection with American thought, and to cast their nets widely. With this collection, we present a new horizon of thinking about Fichte's impact. A search for new dimensions of Fichte's thought is revealed, we hope, by these reflections on Fichte in the Americas. So that's what we hope you'll see today in our discussion too. And thank you for joining us. And thank you to the contributors for their excellent work. It was really a pleasure to work with everybody on it. So I guess we will turn it over to our first contributor. And we decided that was Christian, didn't we?
Yes, I think should be Christian.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I would like to thank to Karin, to Jimena for the invitation, to Pier Paolo for the presentation. First, I would like to talk a bit how maybe I should say what the title of my contribution is. Raimundo de Farias Brito, a critic of positivism between Fichte and Jacobi. First, I would like to talk a bit how I came to work on this Brazilian philosopher, Raimundo de Farias Brito. In 2015, I contributed to a column of the Deutsche Zeitschrift für Philosophie, a text about philosophy in Brazil. Letter from Brazil was the title. And when I wrote the text, I began to study a bit the history of Brazilian philosophy, about which I knew very little until then. And maybe I should say that in general, there is little study of Brazilian philosophy in Brazil. The Brazilian philosophers usually study and discuss European or North American authors, and rarely the names of Brazilian philosophers appear in the course plans of the philosophical faculties. Well, among the authors about which I read something at that time, Raimundo de Farias Brito caught my attention. He lived from 1862 to 1917. To understand his role in Brazilian philosophy, it is important to note that there was at that time a strong influence of Auguste Comte's positivism in Brazil. From the second half of 19th century to maybe the 30s of 20th century, positivism is very strong in Brazil. According to positivism, at least as it was, received, the role of the task of philosophy is exclusively to systematize and synthesize the sciences, scientific knowledge. So there is no task of philosophy beyond this meta-scientific activity, say. So metaphysical thinking, for instance, is regarded to be irrelevant or illegitimate. Now, Raimundo de Farias Brito was part of an anti-positivist movement which arose at the law faculty of Recife in the Brazilian Northeast. He was not exactly a professional philosopher. There were no faculties or departments of philosophy in Brazil at that time. In fact, there was no university in Brazil, but only isolated faculties, principally faculties of engineering, of law, and of medicine. So Raimundo de Farias Brito was a professor of law. He was a critical student of the founder of the so-called School of Recife, Tobias Barreto. And the Barreto developed a kind of theory or philosophy of culture. His critical pupil, Farias Brito, found a different way of realizing, let's say, a non-positivist reflection, namely the idea of philosophy as a theory of subjectivity. And what is generally said is that his theory of subjectivity oscillates between a metaphysical conception of subjectivity and a phenomenological conception, which is already close to Husserl. So he, in a way, anticipated phenomenology before it really arrived in Brazil. So this is what I knew about him when I wrote my letter from Brazil, which was published in 2015. And when some years later I read the title of the Fichte Congress that was organized by Jimena, Fichte en las Americas, I thought immediately that this is the moment for me to really read this author and to try to understand the relation between his conception of subjectivity and Fichte's conception of I-hood and self-consciousness. For this, I focused on Brito's last book, O Mundo Interior, The Interior World, published in 1940. In this book, Brito claims that philosophy is psychology in the sense of a theory of subjectivity that can only be developed from the point of view of one's own self-consciousness. Thus, Brito rejects positivist psychology, whose method is that of external observation. In the first part of my article, I tried to show that Brito's project corresponds under some aspects to the foundation of philosophy that is adopted by Fichte, particularly in its second version, the Wissenschaftslehre Nova Methodo. And there are 3 points I like to highlight. Brito's criticism of positivist psychology is quite similar to Fichte's criticism of dogmatism. Both reject a view of the mind which turns the mind into a kind of thing which is causally explainable. Second, the idea that philosophy has to be developed or constructed from the point of view of self-consciousness, which corresponds clearly to the postulate of the doctrine of science, Nova Methodo, think I, and from the point of view of consciousness of oneself, the theory is constructed. And thirdly, Brito's claim that psychology as a theory of subjectivity cannot be a solipsistic theory of an isolated subject, but it must essentially involve a theory about interpersonal relations. It is a collective psychology, which corresponds to Fichte's conception of recognition of interpersonality as a necessary condition of self-consciousness. So it seems that the non-positivist theory of subjectivity Brito developed is quite similar to Fichte's doctrine of science, particularly the second version. However, and in the second part of my paper, I talk about this. There are some clear differences of Brito and between Brito and Fichte, and they basically they consist, or the difference is that it's a metaphysical character of Brito's position, according to which self-consciousness yields a knowledge of spirit as a thing in itself. In fact, the question of what we can know about the thing in itself is the central question of the book. And Brito, a big part of the book is dedicated to the criticism of positions according to which we can only know phenomena, or only phenomena exist, what Brito calls this phenomenism or absolute idealism. So for Brito, there is a possibility to know something that is not a phenomenon, to know something in itself, by means of self-consciousness. And this is the central claim in his book. The thing that's in itself we can know is spirit, as it reveals itself to us in our self-consciousness. And in this context, he explicitly criticizes Fichte, the worst enemy of the thing in itself. Self-consciousness, and so Brito is a kind of manifestation, a thinking in our consciousness. I think the cogito, thinking manifests itself to us as a real force and as the thing in itself. So Brito's psychology is at the same time a metaphysical theory. In the final part of my paper, I make a reflection or think about the relation between this aspect of Brito's conception and the philosophy of Jacobi. There are, in my view, two aspects of convergence. First, Brito's criticism of phenomenism, of the idea that we can only know phenomena, is in some way similar to Jacobi's criticism of Fichte's philosophy as a nihilism. And second, the idea that in self-consciousness, reality reveals itself to us. That is not just phenomenon. We find also in Jacobi. When Jacobi says that as self-conscious subjects, we reveal ourselves to us. So the idea of revelation or manifestation in Brito seemed to me quite similar. So in this way, finally, so my conclusion is that Brito has a position which is in a way oscillating between, let's say, Fichte and Jacobi from point of view of the post-Kantian philosophy. In fact, Brito refers himself to Jacobi in some moment of the book, saying that his method is similar to his own. For this, the title, for this reason, the title of my article, Raimundo de Farias Brito, Critic of Positivism Between Fichte and Jacobi. So I'm finished. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We hand over to Maria Paz-Lamas.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be here, and it's a very special day to stay here with you because we are not very good at university today. So I hope I let you know about my work and my spirit about this work. And today is very important for me and to stay telling you about this. My text title is Fichte and Korn, Some Messages for Free Spirits. And it deals with Alejandro Korn's reception of Fichte based on passages found in a text entitled Hegel on the First Century of His Death from 1931,
and in one of the main writings of Alejandro Korn that is called Creative Freedom from 1922. And I found that Korn's reception of Fichte could be characterized as a critical reception, since he accused the science of knowledge of solipsism and proposed different solutions to this problem. First, in the text, I shed light on Korn's system, taking into account the difference between both Fichte and Korn. And second, I show that despite these criticisms, it is possible to find a link between both systems. In it, Korn states not only that philosophical activity must be transformative, but also that the principle upon which subjectivity activity is based on wanting or desire. I argue that based on a similar reading of Kant, both thinkers propose that only two systems are possible: the system of the freedom or dogmatism. So I see how Korn came close to the way in which Fichte, in the first introduction of the science of knowledge, presents the two possible systems, as well as in the details of his arguments and for against them. The similarity, I see that is nothing less than the way in which both Fichte and Korn vindicate the spirit of freedom, of which Kant's work is the messenger. I want to tell you who was Alejandro Korn. He is one of the Argentina's greatest thinkers. His dedication to knowledge, to search for the truth, and the critical precision involved in his work made him an exceptional and significant figure. His philosophy, as authentic as universal, had a good impact on the local development of the discipline. He was born in 1860 in San Vicente, in the province of Buenos Aires, and died in La Plata in 1936. He doctorated when he was 22 for a thesis on psychiatry, titled Madness and Crime. And in 1906, he joined the philosophy faculty of the Buenos Aires University as a substitute professor of history of philosophy. And there he became familiar not only with philosophy, but also with Rivarola, who taught Kantian philosophy. As a result of this meeting, Korn read the Critique of Pure Reason, and his interest in philosophy became immediately and intense. For that moment on, he devoted himself to teaching at the University of Buenos Aires and at the University of La Plata, the very important university in Argentina. And in 1918, he supported the Argentine university reform, which took place in the city of Córdoba. And with his contribution, he promoted ideas of renovation of Latin American philosophy, democratization, and freedom. He was the first dean of the philosophy faculty of Facultad de Filosofía y Letras of Buenos Aires University, elected by student vote. And his philosophical activity was aimed to overcoming dogmatic positivism. His basis is a conception of metaphysics as a fundamental tension. We cannot avoid metaphysics, but it has gone from failure to failure. According to Korn, if we turn our back on metaphysics, we are taking a metaphysical position, which is irresponsible, because this stance does not fully solve the problem formed in the Kantian question: what can I know, what must I do, and what may I hope, that harass the soul and give rise to the natural inclination toward metaphysics. So in my paper, I analyze Alejandro Korn's reception of Fichte, because in his book, Creative Freedom, o La Libertad Creadora in Spanish, Fichte appears as the creator of subjective idealism, And in the same way, Korn interprets Fichte in another text. So according to Korn, Fichte thought he understood Kant better than Kant understood himself by only thought the negation of natural laws. And this is why Korn accused Fichte of creation as a solipsistic and a subjective system. But Korn considered Kant as the author to whom it is necessary to turn in order to resemble the metaphysic that the positivism of the late 19th century dismissed. This idea guides his philosophical project and gives that Fichte, based on his philosophy, on Kantian doctrine, Korn considered Fichte to be the one who tried, through idealism, to overcome Kant. But for Korn, post-Kantian philosophy has attempted to expose a principle on Kantian philosophy. In this way, it has annulled the critical dualism from which the speculation starts. So there is a problem. For this reason, on the bicentenary of Kant's birth 100 years ago, 1924, Korn gave a speech in which he said, "We shall not follow Kant, nor shall we agree with him in all of his attempts to demonstrate the evident, to rationalize the illogical. It is enough for us to take up the great doctrine forgotten in the dark times of positivism and economic materialism, which exalt the human personality and oppose it as a center of a free initiative to the play of natural forces." So Korn doesn't ask for adherence to the Kantian system, but he invites us to retain its spirit, to recover metaphysical thought, and remember the tension of the third antinomy, because any attempt to avoid metaphysics is to fall into determinism, into a world without freedom, into the place of natural forces. This is what has proliferated, but it is urgent to think the solution. At the same time, this solution must not proceed like German philosophy, because it's only fall into the most desperate metaphysical speculations, says Korn. So Korn understands that there are elements in Kantian philosophy that can distort it toward to subjective idealism, and there are elements give rise at the same time to scientific positions such as positivism, claiming the ability to give philosophical answers that nullify freedom. That is why he concludes his discourse on Kant by saying, "Let us stick to the master's work and let it be for us the message of free spirit to free one." In this work, remember that on several occasions, Fichte says that his philosophy is nothing more than Kantian philosophy, whose the first founding principle is freedom. We found two readers of Kant who, in different times, geographical locations, and contexts, saw in him an inexhaustible source of inspiration for the development of philosophy. Moreover, beyond Korn's criticisms of Fichte, we can find similarities. Korn and Fichte maintain that there are two possible philosophical systems, that of freedom or dogmatism, and both are concerned with the impact of the theory on practice. From this approach, it is possible to reflect on the concept of freedom that both authors, Fichte and Korn, propose, and from there to find a similarity that Korn does not seem to recognize in Fichte because of his reading, but we can make it better. So just to say a conclusion that I found in the research, I want to tell you about something that I found in the final lines of Creative Freedom that reminds me about Fichte. Until Korn doesn't recognize it. Korn says that in spite of everything, we must do metaphysics, and that the way to do metaphysics is with responsibility. It is in this sense that I can formulate that at present, there are those who try to impose a dogmatic system on us. They are those who argue that the laws of the market are the only ones in charge of organizing society, and that is enough for society to be fair. This implies nothing more and nothing less than surrender to the dominion of necessity and fatality, a surrender to the world that then is our freedom. We cannot avoid metaphysics, even if it goes from failure to failure. That failure is what allows us in each epoch to reflect and update our creative freedom, and the fact that metaphysics does not cease to fail is finally the condition of possibility for us to find again today the free spirit that is struggling to emerge in the middle of the hopelessness to which they want to throw us. If so, let's all metaphysics and philosophy fall, so that no one gives into dogmatic closure, and so that this is the spirit that animates at every moment the system of freedom. Thank you, and I hope I was.
It was very clear. And so the next one on my list is Marco Rampazzo-Bazzan.
So, hello, everybody. I'm glad to be here with you. I apologize for my poor English. I think that the Leuven people know it, but I didn't know what better to do today, and I think that maybe it will be interesting to talk about a philosophical or pedagogical premise to my contribution in the volume, in the book Fichte in America. And I try in a strange way to think my being in Latin America, to question it, to teach philosophy in a Brazilian university as a European white man today, and to think about this problem. I began to read a very important author and patron of Brazilian education, Paulo Freire, and I would like to begin with a quote of one of the most known books of Paulo Freire, that is Pedagogy of Hope, Pedagogia da Esperança. And the quote is the following: neither reading the word alone, nor reading the word alone, but the two in dialectical solidarity. It is precisely the reading of the word that makes it possible to decipher the limit situations more and more critically, beyond which the unprecedented can be found. However, it must be clear that in coherence with the dialectical position in which I place myself, in which I perceive the relationship between word, consciousness, practice, theory, reading the word, context, text, the reading of the word cannot be the reading of academics imposed on the popular classes. End of the quote. And I tried to speak of little important as a distinction that Paulo Freire makes between influence and what he call convivencia, that can be translated by coexistence, conviviality, maybe as in my interpretation as thinking with. At the beginning of his beautiful preface to the Brazilian edition of Peau Noire, Mas Blanche, Louise Gordon writes that a careful reading of the Pedagogy of the Oppressed would reveal how much this work has been influenced by Fanon. We can reasonably assume that upon reading these words, Paulo Freire would have easily acknowledged the presence of the author of the Les Damnés de la Terre in his work. However, this probably would not have happened without him feeling the need to sweetly amend the Jamaican professor's statement. Such as a possibility is suggested by the certain idiosyncrasy that Freire demonstrated on several occasions regarding the issue of the influence of other authors on his thought. This antipathy largely stemmed from the belief that a typically academic approach was, if not outright inadequate for understanding his work, at least incompatible with the practice that animated it. According to Moacir Gadotti, Freire indeed considered it of a little importance to know which authors or philosophical currents had influenced him. And while it is true that on that occasion he primarily sought to escape the dispute in the field of pedagogies surrounding the manualistic simplification that proceed through the categorization of this exponent into currents, affiliation, or schools that are often constructed a posteriori, arbitrary, and convenient, his antipathy or idiosyncrasy regarding the issue of influence seems to have deeper roots. Freire idiosyncrasy toward the term influence is rooted both in the connection between theory and practice, in the critical reading of the world, and in the political reflection of academic practice during the liberation struggles against colonial oppression in the Third World. As Freire himself recalls with a somewhat amused embarrassment, alongside a rigor in addressing a topic or using a particular category in his writing, the question of influence from this or that thinker whose work is sometimes, had not even read, dominated discussion at meetings in University of the Northern Hemisphere during the exile between the United States and Switzerland. He significantly adds that the discussion with students from the Third World would have been of a completely different nature. With them, discussion would always begin by addressing current political issues and then move on the related philosophical, ethical, ideological, and epistemological questions. It is easy to see why Freire felt more comfortable in these later discussions. The flow of discussion with students for former colonies was perfectly in tune with the way he practiced and theorized text reading. It is equally easy to grasp how this practice differed radically from the concerns and standards of academic exegetical readings of a structural, historical, or hermeneutic nature, for a reason that is both simple and fundamental. For Freire, reading is not merely about the even if erudite decoding of the word or written language, but draws its deepest meaning from the connection that the text establishes with the concrete reality of its readers. In other words, for written words to truly make sense, the reading must start from and return to the intelligence of the word. According to him, words and their connection to the world must be kept alive and meaningful, drawing from the concrete reality of the readers who are critically engaged as aware agents. The significance of the words increases when the stakes involves the lives of those who communicate with them or who interact based on them to transform their actual living conditions. In short, for Freire, reading texts is not an end in itself, but must aim for an understanding of the world that will be deeper the more it is rooted in the reality in which the readers are critically inserted. All these elements clarify that it will be a disservice to Freire's thought if the question to consider were more about how well or how faithfully he interpreted this or that author based on their intention, rather than how he engaged in dialogue with other writings and discourses, recognizing points of contact with his own concerns. It is precisely these points of contact that ultimately constituted the real foundation for such encounters and dialogues. In this regard, it is worth recalling what Maria Araújo Freire, Mita Freire, has emphasized about her husband's writing practice. According to her, in Paulo Freire, there was no clear distinction between reading and writing. The two moments were interconnected, a time of reading writing or writing reading. Therefore, to understand his thought, one must grasp then when Freire writes, he simultaneously at the same time reads other authors and rereads himself and others. The practice reaches its greatest intensity during Freire's time in Chile, between 65 and 69. In addition to being marked by this aspect that we could emphatically define as anthropophagic in relation to reading, Freire himself emphasized that his writing is always preceded by discussion about the ideas that will be fixed on the page. This process denotes a clear intersubjective dimension, as these exchanges occur in conversation among friends, seminars, conferences. These meetings were for him a way not only to test ideas, but also to recreate them. They were, in short, decisive moments for expressing one's thoughts on a particular issue in a more complete and systematic way. In this sense, writing is as much about redoing what one was thinking at different moments of practice and a relationship with it. It is as much about recreating as it is about narrating what was before, articulating oneself in the time of action. A serious reading requires one to think what one thinks, write once more writes, and read what before becoming the author's writing was a certain reading of theirs. In this way, writing becomes a singular account of a collective search in which memories, readings, and diverse perspectives are deposited and articulated. It is precisely this political third-world issue that constitutes the problematic horizon of the conjuncture of the 16th, in which Freire thinks and operates between Chile and Brazil, guiding the dialogue and engage not only with Fanon men, but also with other authors he reads while drafting the pedagogy of their passage. In these dialogues with Fanon, Sartre, and others, these authors are called upon as interlocutors with whom Freire conceives the problems of his time in these various contexts of implementations, namely the epochal transition of the Latin America continent from neocolonial underdevelopment to authentic development. In this perspective, we can understand the role of these interlocutors through an analogy between Freire's coexistence and a particular type of friendship that Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari consider essential to the practice of philosophy in the preface to What is Philosophy? For them, the friend, as conceptual figure, becomes a condition for exercising thought, of thinking, on a particular object, on problems. So, what I try to do in my paper, I tried to problematize, to question the effect of reading Fichte in Latin America, and I started from the correspondence of Baudelaire, drawing upon Baudelaire's imaginary of nature in correspondence as a rich tapestry of symbols and meanings. And thinking about Latin America, not merely a serene temple, but rather a crossroad where conflicting identities, memories, and social structures converge. This intricacy is shaped by the struggle, migration, and various forms of colonization, creating a space where new narratives arise for the interplay of perspectives. I try to build correspondences between my past and my present place from Europe and Latin America, from this side and the other side, inspired by Rivera. The goal was to theorize and practice an accomplice reading, and Julio Cortázar emphasizes that the importance of dynamic relationship between the writer and the reader, which is essential for understanding any narrative. This complicity allows for multiple interpretation and requires empathy, where the reader engage deeply with the text, fostering a shared journey of discovery. Similarly, Fichte's philosophy underlines that understanding work hinges on readers' active participation and their ability to recreate the original spirit of the text in their own context. Fichte argues that true understanding goes beyond rote memorization. It demands an active dialogue with oneself and a commitment to personal reflection. This idea resonates with Marx's calls for readers to think independently, highlighting the difference between passive acceptance of authority and active engagement with ideas. The active reader must not only absorb information, but also draw conclusions and form resolutions, embodying the philosophy presented in the text. This approach fosters a community of shared responsibility between authors and readers, encouraging a collective re-examination of the world and our actions within it. Tried was to recuperate the question of real development, so the question of the second independence, and build a dialogue with Fichte's considerations to the cultural occupation or influence of France in the German-speaking Principates at the beginning of the 19th centuries. And that was my presentation for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. So our last speaker for today's session is Manuel Tangora. Manuel.
Yes. Thank you all for your. Thank you, Pierpaolo, and thank you everyone for what you are sharing with us here about this. I think this wonderful project that finally appeared in the form of this book. So I'm going to be very brief about my own contribution, and then I will say something about the whole part in which my contribution is inscribed. So my paper was an attempt to create a sort of dialogue between what Fichte says in his late political philosophy, mainly in the addresses to the German nation, and what is happening the very same period in the reflection surrounding the process of independence in South America, and in particular in the Rio de la Plata region, which is what today is Uruguay and Argentina, and what also will also be influence other independence processes across the continent. So my idea was trying to create a sort of a synchronic reading between these two discourses on political independence and national sovereignty. And because there is no direct influence from one, from Fichte to the thinkers that were involved in this process, but I think that there are similar concerns that we can identify. And that's why I took as a reference of this independentist movement in the Rio de la Plata, a thinker and political figure pretty important, and that was Mariano Moreno, as a sort of to create this dialogue between these two situations and context. And somehow let's say the red thread between these two discourses is the Napoleonic expansion in Europe, because it's the Napoleonic occupation of Spain in the first decade of the 19th century that what is also one of the factors that sparked somehow the revolutionary impulse in South America. And what I try to do is to sort of compare these two parallel arguments that both Fichte and Mariano Moreno presented against the idea that, or in order to assert this national and popular independence of El Rio de la Plata and Germany against the Napoleonic imperialism as a way to confront the expansion of modern rational policies in its imperial version. Because this is a question that I think that Fichte scholar has been discussing a lot about the late Fichte, especially why Fichte was against Napoleonic occupation, because after all, it's a process of modernization that is going on. There is a process of institutionalization of freedom, and why is that Fichte was so clearly against this process. And I think that that's why I explore in the chapter the concept of Urfolk, which means native people or originary people, as a way of emphasizing the conditions in which these rational principles or rational laws that allows the institutionalization, the actualization of freedom, can be developed in an autonomous manner. And this is and somehow the initial idea for this is the fact that in the debate on the independence in South American countries, there were a similar debate, because somehow Spain was going through a modernization of the imperial regime, and they were just saying, okay, now that we are not this old-fashioned monarchy, why we not altogether create one single political institution, that means Spain, both European Spain and America Spain, in order to be all together in this process of rational institutionalization. And the independencies said no. Because in order for these principles to be really rational, they need to be somehow attached, rooted to a process that needs to be addressed as such. So it's a sort of principle of an attempt to territorialize or to inscribe these rational principles and laws in this originary existence of communities. And this was more or less the idea of the chapter. Yes, because the independentists use a similar notion, saying that there is sort of previous reality of the people before any institutional bond. And I think that this resonates with this attempt of Fichte to highlight these conditions for the creation of a rational order in Germany and in Europe in general. So that was my more or less the idea that I explored in the chapter, and then I'll just say something more general about the whole part, which is the first part of the book, in which there are different attempts to recreate a dialogue between American problems, I would say, and Fichte's philosophy. In this third part, it's not specifically about reception, but more about how we can trace, how we can identify similar concerns in Latin American thought and American thought more generally, and in the thinking of the German idealists and particularly Fichte. And that's just, I think that this is not only important what these contributors do because of the content of it, but also because it provides a new methodological approach to how we read these canonic figures such as Fichte, but it could be others, in light of these more global problems. And I think that one of the important things of the book is that it provides sort of, I would say, global history of Fichte's thought and German idealism in general, And this implies the reception, which is sometimes more fragmentary, and some others more systematic, but also the comparison of how we can apply Fichte's concepts to other contexts and situations. And I want to say something about the process that led to this book, and I think that this is important to see on this methodological issue, is that I remember we had several discussions and very strong discussion on whether Fichte could be used to think on problems of post-colonial thought or of anti-imperialist thought, and whether Fichte was a sort of another expression of these Eurocentric views about history, politics, etc. And I think that I also want to thank all the contributors for that, and especially the editors Jimena and Elizabeth, because you create the space to have both perspectives. At the same time, saying that Fichte can contribute decisively to new debates that are going on in the Americas, and at the same time also allowing the space for criticism. That is also important, and to criticize Fichte or German idealism more generally, where there are problematic issues. And I think that this taking the risk somehow to expose this, to open this space, is something very interesting. So on that note, I would like to thank you, all the contributors, and again, Jimena and Elizabeth, for editing the volume and coordinating the whole process that led to this book. So that would be all. Thank you.
Thank you, Manuel. And on this wonderful note, I think we can conclude this part of the session, of today's session. And thank you all for your remarks on the book. And we can open the floor for questions now. We have plenty of time, so please simply raise your hand, either physically or by using the raise hand function. I see Karin. Please, Karin.
Yes, so congratulations again on a great project and a great results. I learned a lot from your contributions, because I'm not at all familiar with the theme of Fichte and the Americas. And so I don't have a very specific question, but a more general one. And I was wondering if one of you, or maybe the editors, or maybe one of the contributors, could say a bit more about the role of Fichte in the Latin American reception in relation to other philosophers, such as Hegel or Marx. Yes, because of course the volume has a specific theme, but to me it's not really clear whether, for instance, the role of Fichte was more important than that of Marx or Hegel in certain context or in certain respects. I know that Hegel was also important in the 20th century Latin American philosophy, also because of his idea of freedom and so on. And to me, it's not really clear how I can, as it were, see the whole constellation.
Well, thank you, Karin. Maybe I can say some very general and basic ideas. Maybe Manuel has more to say about Hegel's reception in Latin America, or if anyone wants to add something, just please speak. What I would say is that mainly Kant Kant is the main figure of this constellation of thinkers that was recepted in Latin America. He's the first philosopher to be mentioned and appropriated in not of course in an academic way, not studied to be to develop an exegetical view of his thought or system, but in order to develop some ideas that were associated with Enlightenment and with critical philosophy and transcendental idealism. So there is quite an ongoing and well, it has been developing for some years now, this study of the reception of Kant in America. And I think Hegel is the other main character of the German classical philosophy that has been recepted in America. Fichte, of course, got kind of lost in history, and as well as it happened, I guess, in Europe. So he wasn't considered one of the big names of German idealism, and that is why our surprise to find a reception of Fichte was quite big. So in my case, I wrote on Alberdi, who is quite a leading figure of the first movement of one would call them the Romantics in our country, and the fact that Alberdi is the first person in Argentina to mention Kant and to kind of use Kant to give foundation to a cultural project and proposal of reform and so on, of well, a cultural revolution, as he called it, a spiritual revolution, is very clear. So his use of Kant is quite clear. But what I found is that he also mentions Fichte in this when thinking about German philosophy or European philosophy in general. So even if he didn't know Fichte, he hadn't read them, and he probably didn't have a lot of information of what Fichte was writing about, he mentions him. So it's hard to say if there is if it helps or it doesn't help Fichte's reception to be associated with these big names of the tradition. Sometimes it does. Sometimes they all come together, like the German idealists. But sometimes Fichte's name kind of got lost between the big two figures of Kant and Hegel. So when the academic world starts studying Fichte, I would say it's, well, into the 20th century, and thanks to Ortega y Gasset, who is a Spanish professor who comes to Argentina and starts giving some lectures on German idealism. And thanks to this presence of this Spanish professor and big intellectual, German idealism as a whole starts to be understood more in its details and more as a subject of rigorous study and rigorous reading. Before that, it's more of a cultural appropriation of some names and some ideas. And one of the interesting points that we discovered through this project is that Fichte's addresses to a German nation were the most spread and most well-known work. And it was used, as Manuel and also Marco were pointing out, and well, Paz, of course, spoke about that too. They were used to think about this notion of people. So the interesting thing was that the problem that these new countries in America had, these new republics that were being built, the problem they faced was how to think about a people that is unified and that has an identity, and that is the exact same problem that Fichte poses in the addresses to the German nation. So the idea of people, of nationalism, patriotism that Fichte develops in a very original way had a really strong impact here. And I think that didn't have something to do with being a part of the German idealist movement or in connection with other names, but it was kind of through his own merit, so to say.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. I don't know if Elizabeth has a follow-up on this or another question. Maybe?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on that just quickly because it's a very good question. We never were trying to make a kind of historical point that Fichte is the linchpin in all the German thinkers to understanding discussions in America. Because, as you mentioned, if I'm doing which I have done, readers on Latin American philosophy, for the US American public, Marxism comes to mind before Fichte does, of course. And Marxism continues to have a very important role in Latin American philosophy. Though, as Christian pointed out, I was shocked when my first job was in Venezuela, and I was so excited. Finally, I'm going to be able to teach Latin American philosophy, and people will be excited about it, unlike in the US. I go there, and what do they want? The first thing one graduate student told me in Spanish was "Carezco de Kant." I love that. I mean, that you're in a place where people think this is very important to have Kant in their lives. But, it was Kant. It could have been Fichte, could have been Hegel. It was more this idea, as Jimena just raised, that is still problematic. And I think it explains what the problem that Christian pointed out, that in Latin America, it's not been the custom that people are curious about the Latin American philosophical tradition. They are saying, "Carezco de Kant," I'm missing Kant, because it's it's part of the colonial condition, one could argue, in a way, that the thinkers from Europe are the ones that have a kind of cultural philosophical currency. And our volume, in a way, is trying to fight against that, because to show, it is Fichte in the Americas, but it's also showing that aspects of Fichte only come to light if we look at the reception in America. And a lot of this is coincidental. The first one I go to always with coincidences in who gets kind of taken up is Karl Kraus, right? Because he somehow finds a translator in Spain. And so Krausismo takes on, I would argue, I'm sorry for any Krausistas in the audience, a much stronger role than is due to him. When I was in Tübingen studying, Manfred Frank would always tell me, "Oh, you should do something on Kraus." I was not interested in Kraus. I'm still not interested in Krausismo. But sometimes all it takes is someone to translate a thinker into a language. And then, again, that's the problem sometimes in the Spanish-speaking or the Portuguese language tradition, that you need the text translated. And sometimes your question comes up then too. Well, why is this one translated and not the other one? And as Jimena pointed out with Ortega, he's doing a lot of the bridge building because of exile and tragedy, one could argue, with fascism, right? And Franco pushing the intellectuals away, and he goes then to America and starts building this bridge. And why is he doing German philosophy? Because even in Spain, what's the path you need to take is to read the Germans. And I think there are big discussions we can have about reasons why that's happening. And there's some good reasons why Kant and Hegel and Fichte end up being read so widely. Some of it is mere deference, I would argue, and we have to break that down. And I think part of breaking that down is exposing people to these other voices like Alejandro Korn and others who deserve to be read too, not as mere appendages to these European thinkers, but as thinkers on their own terms, and the work of Friday and others. So I think that is important. But I think in this case, what your question, what Fichte, part of it is happy coincidence, right? The North American Fichte Society, the Aleph, were being brought together, and were working on Fichte and finding then these commonalities. But you're absolutely right. Could have been Hegel, and there's a nice volume being planned on German idealism and some of these themes in the Americas as well. So I think it is a bigger project that needs to be taken up. So I guess we can't give you a kind of historical necessity. Maybe there's a Hegelian question behind your question, but we're not Hegelian. So, but thank you for that.
Thank you, Jimena Elizabeth. Yeah. I heard something, but I couldn't get. Okay, no, maybe I'm wrong. So I don't know if anyone else wants to add something on this. Okay, then we can move to Luis. Please, Luis.
Yeah, so thank you for the book, thank you for the presentation, and I think the book is a wonderful contribution to the scholarship, and I'm very happy that you did it. And I think that, well, there are many dimensions to this that I think are really important, but one of them connects to what Marco was saying, and I wanted to ask him about this. Because he mentioned that sometimes the way you read a text can be influenced by your own context, and you can somehow unveil different layers of meaning depending on the perspective that you're coming from when reading the text. And I have two questions about this, one for Marco and one for all of you. So, Marco, since you are in Brazil, do you think, is there anything in Fichte's text that changed for you? Do you read some theses or some texts differently? Did it change the way you approach the text? Or how do you feel that? Because I think this is connected to what you were saying about how to read the text, so on. And to all of you, after the project, going through the whole process of preparing the book and doing the book, do you read Fichte differently? Did it change something for you in the way you approach the text? Or there are specific passages that somehow for you means something else or means something different now? And yeah, thanks. So perhaps Marco, if you want to, yeah.
No, thank you for the question. It's a real good question. So an easy answer could be yes, in Brazil die Reden an die deutsche Nation so now different read after reading your article about the bridges, the connection with a crítica da razão do Piniquim, for example. The problems when we're starting from Freire is another one, is that can does Fichte help to think about something in Brazil? That's the point. Is the lecture, the reading of the word, WORLD, and that is the prayer, and that is the point. I think that I started, let's say, to read Paulo Freire. Really, I confess it, to try to build a bridge to Fichte. I think that there are many points that of an elective affinity, but then with Freire, I found the example of a practice of philosophy that is completely different and that helps to question the academic practice. That is a really important point, and that is one of the points of a possible affinity from Fichte and Freire. Yes. And in is with carefully with we have a problem of the way of making philosophy in the institution and the Brazilian society, and that deals with a way of making philosophy that had been chosen in the institution. And there are the problems of cultural colonization, and the point is that the context of the readers is important and can build new ways of reading the text. And this context cannot be neutralized or forgiven. And that happened often as in the way of reading philosophers of Europe, North America, and Brazil and Latin America. That I think that is a problem, and at the same time is more complicated. That it appears in the actual discussion. It's not to we have to recognize that the impact of those philosopher thinkers of this culture is an integral part of the Brazilian culture. And we must say practice new ways of making philosophy, of reading text. What can be significant in Vitoria, in a popular portal of Vitoria. That's an important question for me. It's not why Kant is the philosopher, is the owner of the truth, but because of Kant can help to understanding discourse of the elite of the institution, discourses they reproduce the oppression and the subalternity of those parts of the society. I think that is the...
Thank you. Thank you. Does anyone wants to add anything on this? Elizabeth? Yes, please.
Yeah, I would just add, because it's a really great question, especially, well, the issue of text and circumstance. Well, you said context, but I go back to Ortega and circumstance always. That's just my Spanish affinity with my fellow Spanish thinker. There aren't too many of them, so I've got to cling to them. But this idea also of reading Fichte differently in light of the collection, I can say certainly different, I think different, I see Fichte's work and the work of all good philosophers as almost like a work of art. And so the interpretations, the different work on a given philosopher pulls out the meaning. And I think when too often the same group of people is reading the same text for the same sorts of reasons, we don't see all the meaning that can emerge from it. So I saw perspectives of Fichte's thought illuminated much more strongly because of the essays that were written for this collection. And I think, for example, that going back to your first question, so they come together, the answers to two of the questions, the circumstance and text question, because of course, in certain sections of the collection, we're talking about nation building. And it is interesting that in the nation building going on in this part of America, not so much the United States, which I always find interesting, that philosophers are considered very important in this nation building process. Yes. And French philosophers, Comte, German philosophers, Kant, Hegel, Fichte, Marx later. So these philosophers are forming part of the foundation of the nation building going on. And I think that brings to light something very close to Fichte's period, as Gunther Zoller's work has shown really clearly this idea of revolution, and Weiser's done it too. And Jimenez worked on this, the idea of revolution in Fichte, and then to see an actual revolution taking place and the work towards independence going on and the reliance on philosophical thoughts. And then some of the essays taking that period in Argentina's history with Perón, whatever you want to think about that period, but Fichte plays a role. And so philosophers are taking center stage, German philosophers, in these political unfoldings. And I think that is worth looking at. There is that colonial shadow that can fall over, but there is also something that's being pulled out that, you know, I'm not going to say is free of any colonial shadows, because we have to always be looking at that. And I did appreciate Manuel's point that, because we were very careful of that. We don't want to present Fichte as the hero. There are problems in some of the claims that are being made by Fichte, but there's also a beautiful promise here in the idea of freedom. And it's having an impact, and that's exciting to see, I think, and worth looking at more carefully, because the project is not finished yet, right? The project of liberation isn't finished. And so we always have to be looking back at it and seeing where else we can find resources. Fichte is not the only one. But I think Fichte is a really interesting place to look, along with other thinkers in that period, and their limitations. I just wanted to add that there. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Thank you. Any last remark on Luis' question? Jimena?
I would like to just add something really quickly. I completely agree with what Elizabeth just said, and also with Marco. So just to add something more, I think that one of the main things that we learned from, or I at least learned from this adventure of searching for Fichte's reception in America, is that any text will change depending on what questions you propose the text. So I think that's really what changes from our reading of the text. That's really something that Fichte himself emphasizes, no? This active reading. Well, one has to think for oneself when one is reading, and the book will not allow you to learn. The book won't teach you anything. You teach something to yourself, and that activity is what Fichte is really trying to inspire. And I think that is a strong message that goes through the ages and It doesn't matter in what language it's written, the idea behind it is really powerful. And we feel this, what Fichte calls Auffordern, this calling, this invitation to be active in our role as intellectuals and as philosophers and as students of Fichte. So I think that's really what changed for me the most. This coming to understand and really coming to practice what Fichte is trying us to understand and practice, and to see that in that way everything changes. Fichte changes, but our own cultural history also changes by trying to build a bridge, but also by trying to erase differences that are really artificial between the value and the importance of different traditions or different texts. So yes, great question, kind of to reflect on the whole of the project. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We have maybe 1 more minute for one last question, if there is. Okay, so if not, then I think we can conclude here, but please join me in thanking again all the speakers, the editors for this wonderful discussion and volume. Yeah, that was very, very nice. Before we conclude this session, let me remind everyone about our next session of the Leuven seminar, which also will be quite special because it will be, well, the title of the session is Commemorating the Work and Legacy of Bob Stern. So it's a very important session. We will have speakers touching upon Bob Stern's work and legacy. So you're all invited to join, and it will take place on October 24, yes, from 5 to 7 Central European Time. And yes, and we will keep this Zoom meeting open. So if you want to stay, please do. But thank you very much again.